Hey guys, so we are kicking it in my car with Jill Monaco. So I met Jill online on Instagram and I've been watching her podcast and following her. She's a fellow sister in Christ and I'm just really inspired by her. And I noticed that I love her podcasts and videos and things like that, blog, website. You got to check it all out. It's so encouraging. And I just was so inspired by her and I was like, where can I see your testimony video? Because I've heard little glimpses of things and stories. I was like, wait a minute, this is really brilliant. I want to hear more. And she's like, oh, I've never done one. I was like, oh, I want to hear your whole life story, Jill. So that's what we're doing. And I heard just you in a SUV in your car, the way that you followed, I think was so radical in such a way, but you have such a spirit that's a gentle spirit. So I think it's so interesting to hear some of I want to hear all about. Hi.
I feel the same way about you. I love this spirit about you, and thank you for asking me about my testimony and stuff. But it's interesting, right? When someone has gone through a lot of hard stuff, you're like, how are you still I've had people say, how do you even still love Jesus? After everything that happened to you. And I'm like, but it was man who failed. It's Jesus who didn't.
Right.
He's the one that saved me from my own destruction. He's the one that loved me when others hurt me. So anyway, so I'm happy to share my testimony. Where do you want me to start?
Well, so you're from Chicago, from the burbs in Chicago. And did you have so you're a Christian coming up, right? Or Catholic?
I was raised Catholic. So I went to Catholic schools and Catholic church. For a little bit, a friend of mine took me to her church, which, in those days, if you were Catholic, you didn't go to, a church. And it was Assembly of God. And they had something called Awana, which was for kids, and you memorize Bible verses and stuff. And that was the first time I was I went to Sunday school, so I learned the stories, some of the main stories. I never really read my Bible. So and
then you won a memorization contest or something?
I didn't remember. I remember the kids being like, that Catholic girl won the 10.
She just came and swooped up. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
But memorized the most verses.
And then, that's incredible.
Yeah.
I struggle to memorize verses. I always paraphrase them. So you went through, there's some tough stuff that came up, and you went through some abuse in the Catholic Church. And can we talk a little bit about that and what you feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, sure. When I was right out of 7th grade, so it was the summer between 7th and 8th grade, I went to the Catholic Church, started a youth group, and the priest who oversaw that was in his early 20s, and he was fun, and he just, created an atmosphere of fun for the kids. And one day, and this is all on my blog, so I feel totally comfortable sharing it. But one day when he drove me home from youth group, actually this part isn't on my blog, but when he drove me home from youth group was the first time he molested me. And it was very aggressive, and it was forcing himself on me. And then it continued all summer. But what's interesting and
you were alone in his car even? So that's,
Yeah, he dropped all the other kids off first, and I was the last.
Okay, you were wow. Did you hear of other stories of girls or boys? Okay.
No, not at the time, but once I put my story on my blog, one of my other girlfriends from youth group that were connected on Facebook reached out and said he did the same thing to me. And that was.
And years later, this is.
Yeah, last year, she told me.
Wow. And you opened up about it years later, not right away. It took a long time.
Yeah, I think, and I've gotten therapy to kind of understand that, but it's really common for people who've been victims to think it's their fault. I must have done something. I remember thinking, I'm in 7th grade. I just started developing, and boys are paying attention to you because you're starting to develop. And I remember thinking there was something wrong with my body, because I'm attracting men in an inappropriate way. It wasn't love. It was, gross stuff, boys saying, oh, we made out behind the bushes, and making up lies about me that weren't true. And so when the priest thing happened, I remember just feeling, even through high school, shame, I must have done something to attract him, and I made this man of God break his vows. But it's also the way they groom you and tell you, if you tell anyone, this is what'll happen. And so you develop a secrecy and a shame that
Yeah.
somehow it's your fault and you can't tell anyone or you'll get in trouble.
Mm.
So I didn't report him until in Illinois, the Illinois State's Attorney started an investigation into the Catholic Church because of some of the revelations from Pennsylvania. And so I finally felt like, oh, I can tell someone and they'll listen to me and they'll believe me, because I had tried when I was younger, pastored a church, and nobody knew what to do, basically. And I think we're in a new world now where people are more proactive about helping victims. But so I was 50 before I said anything.
Wow.
And then I told the police, there was a whole system of what to do. Like,
Did you see him again? Like after that, did he do that again when you were younger? It was ongoing?
Yeah, it happened all summer. But then when I was in 8th grade, he actually came to visit us in class, and he walked behind me and was massaging my shoulders. And there were a couple other things where he tried to get me alone with him, and I said no. And, so there are a couple other times where I saw him. And then a father from the youth group approached him and said, leave her alone. She asked you to leave her alone. And no one ever said anything to me about it after that, but the priest left and I never saw him again. But he did reach out to me again in my 20s by phone. And so, there were a couple other times when he tried.
And then, so you had like a court case and that kind of, like you're still involved, and so you're taking out.
Yeah, it's a little tricky.
Is he still practicing?
No. So the detectives approached him and he admitted it. And this is all in police records, like anyone can see it. But then there were other incidences where he was counseling women and was inappropriate with them, and other women have come forward to talk to me or their families. So I've heard, about other times so this was a problem for him his whole life. Right.
Yeah.
But when I had confronted him about it, when I was in my 40s, I called him to confront him. And he called it a relationship. He's like, I think fondly of our relationship. And I was like,
wow,
that was not a relationship. Like, I was a child, Yeah. So there's a lot of detail. So I missed the statute of limitations, basically. So I can't do anything, but there's a lot more to the story that I can't really say.
Yeah. And then, so I think when people hear that, the trouble, I think, with a lot of, it's hard with abuse in the church and things like that, where people identify that with all like religion and a relationship with Christ, and that goes kind of all in this big lump of like why people shouldn't believe in God. It's like that's what people hear, when we have to just remember that, right? Like we don't fight flesh and blood, and that that our relationship with God is important, and man just fails. Like we fail.
Yeah. And I also think, like I'm in ministry full time now, and I help people get free. And I as a certified life coach and inner healing minister, like I combine the two, and I help people get through that. And if you think about it, God has a destiny for all of our lives. And that means the enemy, who's been watching mankind since the beginning, he knows what it looks like when God has anointed someone or called them to something. And so sometimes the attacks are even stronger for those that are called. So I loved God as a little girl, and, and he probably saw some of that and put some of that, destruction into my path. But it's not, I know people get angry at God, but God is the one who actually healed me from all that pain, and the enemy is the one who is at fault for that to happen, not God.
Right.
So
yeah. And so through healing, like what did healing look like for you? Is there like, like being in prayer, being,
yeah, it was a long journey. Eventually,
and then finally being open is probably like a good, like almost chapter. Like there's still probably more, but
I think there's always more healing.
There's more.
Yeah, it's like, oh, I got triggered by that. Oh, I guess there's more there. I didn't know,
Yeah.
But healing for me, like, really started when I got saved. And I started pursuing God over my pain. And when you're raised in kind of a legalistic environment, I was taught God would discipline me. He would be mad at me. That was what I thought of God. So when I messed up, I didn't want to go to him. And then your view of God is going to define your relationship with him. So that's why it's so important to know him in scripture and to know who he is as a good father who gives good gifts to his children, who works all things together for good, who thinks you're beautiful and you're fearfully and wonderfully made. To know those verses and to not just know them, but to let God speak to you personally.
Yeah, I'm receiving that.
Yeah, like to really, so I had to go to him and find out, who are you really? And I actually had to be mad at God at times and yell at him.
Yeah.
And
He
have
can
these
handle it. Yeah,
totally
you just let it out.
Yeah. And even if I sinned again, he was like, daughter, I know why you do it. Like, I know what brokenness causes you to have a habit of sin. And so he's never been cruel. He's never been judgmental whenever I go to him, no matter if it's someone else who's hurt me or I've done something wrong. He's always so gentle. He's always like, I love you. I'm proud of you. Like, and that, if you think about it, that makes me want to be better, you know, especially, it's not like, oh, I've got permission to sin. It's, I don't even want to. That's not who I am.
Right.
So, but I didn't know that for years and years until I really started working on learning who God is and learning who I was in his eyes.
So after this happened, and then how did you find like a Christian, or like what denomination did you go into after that? Like what was the road looking like in high school? And
yeah, in high school and in college and all through my 20s, I walked away from God because I had other situations and things that had happened that made me feel like I sinned too much. Like, I was raised knowing not to have premarital sex, and I did, you know? And so I just, going back to that mean, judgmental God, that's who, I didn't give him the chance to prove me wrong, you know? And so, and then also being involved, my degree was musical theater. And so I was doing theater, and a lot of it had to do, I mean, you and I have talked about this offline, that our figures and what we looked like is what we got praised for, is what we made money from. And so I was in that culture, in that world where God wasn't a part of it. And I was extremely hurting and lonely, and you know, that looking for love in all the wrong places type of thing that I know that you can relate to. Like, I just was trying to numb my pain with anything, not knowing God was the one that could do that.
Yeah. And so you went into like acting. What kind of acting did you get into, and like what'd you find?
So I was musical theater. So I was really blessed. I mean, looking back, I always worked from the time I got out of college. I did things like, you know, Six Flags or Busch Gardens in the beginning. And then I sang backups for someone named Perry Como. A lot of people won't know who he is, but he was like Frank Sinatra. He was that age and a crooner. So I sang for him. I did, you know, I'd audition on New York and do tours and do regional theater. And then that went into doing commercials and voiceovers. And you know, so I was in the industry full time.
Did you have glimpses of like God moments, or that you'd go into ministry, or that like there's moments where like, how did that lead into like, well, maybe I want to do something else, or searching?
Yeah, that's totally, and that's so cool, because I love that question, because you'd think like, what happened? And I wasn't dabbling really. I think I still have those scriptures in me, right? So you memorize scriptures as a kid or whenever, and it never leaves you. It becomes a part of you. And so when I needed truth, I think I tried my best to live a good life, you know, and I knew what God said in some ways, but I obeyed out of fear instead of love. And so it got to the point where there was a strike. So I'm SAG and AFTRA, and the union strikes were going on. And so I couldn't work.
Was that like 2007? When was that?
2002 and 3, somewhere around there. And it was also 9/11 had happened. And I was doing a lot of trade show industry stuff too. And so all the years are blending together, but right around then, because in 2003, I was I went to a restaurant with a friend to have breakfast before our show. And so we had Sunday matinees. And I ran into a friend from Awana that I went to that with.
Yeah.
And she was like, you should come to church. Well, when you work on Friday, Saturday night, and Sunday day, like when you've got matinees and shows, you can't go to church.
Yeah. And they're like, there's 11:30. I'm like, that's so early.
Yeah. You're like, no, like I gotta, get to the theater. And so she invited me to church. Well, when the strike happened and I couldn't work and I wasn't doing theater at that time, I'd taken a little break. That's a whole other story, but I was married to a choreographer in my 20s and we had just gotten divorced.
Do you dance?
I did. Well, so I sang and danced. Yeah. Not as good as you, girl. Like I don't have to move.
Well, I can't sing, so.
But I loved that. And, but he was, so, when you are abused, you end up marrying or dating people that aren't good to you as well. And so I dated and married this man who wasn't healthy for me and emotionally abusive. And so I thought very little of myself. And so the long story short is, while I was in that relationship and he was very critical of my body and things like that, I was in a show with another man, that we had a kiss in the show. It was part of our characters. And that just carried outside then because I was like, wow, I haven't really been kissed like that in a long time.
Yeah.
Because my ex just didn't want to kiss me. He didn't want to have sex. Like it was just very abusive that way.
Yeah.
And so, so I had the affair. And then I broke up with both of them. I got divorced, broke up with that guy. I just wanted to be alone. And so I really
refresh, redo.
Yeah. I wanted the reset button big time. And at that time, my career was doing really, really well. And, so it kind of transitions into how I got into the church because here my career is going great, but I am an emotional mess. I'm dating different guys that aren't good for me. I remember thinking I'm only going to date guys that are really handsome and rich, and I will not have sex with them. Like I decided, it's kind of funny, but it was like, I wanted to.
These are my boundaries.
Okay. And I dated a really nice guy who fit all of that and would honor my boundaries. But for me, the boundaries and those things were out of fear. And it was a way I could control and make sure I wasn't being used again. But instead, they often say, if you've been abused, you abuse. And so I was doing the same thing, just in a different way that didn't seem as bad. And nobody would know that I was going through so much hard stuff,
Yeah.
So
just you could feel your intention and where it came from. It was hurt.
Yeah. And then I had a boyfriend and I cheated on him and it meant nothing to me. So I wouldn't have sex with my boyfriend, but I'd have sex with this other guy. So I was just very messed up.
Just coming from hurt. Yeah.
So, but at the time the strike happened, I was like, I need a job. Like, what am I going to do to pay my mortgage? And so
gonna be a waitress.
And I hated waiting tables. I had done it and I was like, I don't want to do it. But I would have, and so I remember, you ever have those moments where you're like, I remember where I was when I had this conversation with God. It was one of those moments. And I was driving down this road and I said, God, I am so tired of it being all about me. It's what do I look like? Am I skinny enough? Am I pretty enough? Do I have the right song or monologue or am I networking right? And I got so tired of that junk in the industry. And I said, God, I want to work for you like 5 minutes from my home. I have no idea why I said that. Other than the Spirit of God often tells us how to pray. And we say things.
Wow.
Where'd that come from?
Talked to him or connected in the longest time. And then you were just like, use me.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I started having these experiences.
Just imagine angels in heaven just like, woo!
Totally.
Woo, woo, woo!
Like, they're like, yes, we will answer that prayer. Yeah. And I started having these weird experiences. Like, I was having furniture delivered and a big entertainment center, and I lived in the cul-de-sac in a townhouse, and I was like, they were really late, and I was like, where are they? And this is before, like, cell phones were a thing, but we didn't have the connectivity. This is in 2000.
Yeah, maybe a flip phone. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, where are they? And I heard a voice in my head say, the movers are here. They can't find you. Go outside. And I was like, all right. So when you're not a believer, you're like, oh, ESP or whatever. You don't know what it is, right? And so I went outside and there were the movers on the street and they go, oh, good, we couldn't find you. And I went in my garage and I'm waiting for them. And I was like, God, why do I know all these random things that are not important? Because this had been happening a lot at that time.
Yeah.
And what I heard was the most awesome thing. And I know it was him. And he said, I want you to know my voice in the little things so you'll know them in the big things.
Oh,
he really wanted me to know his voice. And here's the thing, like, God speaks to those that don't love him and don't follow him because he loves us. Like, it really has nothing to do with us. And so shortly after that, I started going to this little church, like 50 people, where my girlfriend had gone, the one I'd met in the breakfast place. And some of the people there were in Awana that I had known as kids. So it felt like a little familiar. And a long story short, their worship leader stepped down and they're like, you can sing, like you should be, you should lead worship. Oh, I missed the part. I was
just like walked right into it, right?
Like
right
totally. Yeah. Like,
yeah.
They had me on staff temporarily. Like they hired me for part-time to like direct the dramas and arrange the worship music. And it was just a gig for me. I was like, oh, it's just good extra money until, I can go back to acting. And then the worship leader stepped down. And then I was like, I cannot do that. Like, I'm thinking, I was like, oh, sure. And in my head, I'm like, there's
what I signed myself up for. Now I have to do this.
Well, I was living a life that I knew if they found out, they would never let me lead worship.
Yeah.
Like,
but God meets you where you're at. Yeah.
Like I have a boyfriend and I'm sleeping with him. I'm cheating on him. I'm like, I'm a mess. I'm drinking a bottle of wine at night. Like, I should not be on staff, but here I am on staff at a church living this life. And I joke like, only God would do something like this. Like God puts us in places based on our destiny, not on our history, and not even on our present. It doesn't even matter what we're doing, like right now. He'll put you in places that will call you up into who he wants you to be. And so so I ended up going home and getting on my knees on my bed. And I just said the most sincere prayer that is like a sinner's prayer if it was written out. And I said, God, I am a mess. I have tried to stop sinning in these ways. I cannot sing on that platform unless you help me. Like, I'm sorry, but you've got to help me because I don't know what else to do. And that was the day I gave my life to Christ. And immediately, like, his word made sense. And I'm hearing him and he's telling me insights and wisdom into scripture. Like, I was so different that my friends were like, what the heck is going on?
Were your friends okay with the transition? I think that's a really tough kind of spot. Sometimes when you're like moving into, it's not always graceful. And you're like, guys, I love Jesus. And some people can't hear it yet. They're like, well, what does that mean?
Right. Well, the strike was going on. So I wasn't doing theater at the time. I had taken that year off. And so I wasn't interacting with a lot of those friends from theater, but my on-camera friends, it's kind of like, you just don't talk about that stuff at work, but there were a few different people that I knew were Christians or a producer that I worked with. And I remember the producer when I was leaving the industry, because I was going to go into ministry full time. I mean, he's still a friend of mine. And he said, Jill, God is a wise investor. He will not waste anything. And so now I look at how he's using all the experience I had. Now, like, I record professionally audiobooks for Christian books. It's blending my two worlds.
Is it all?
I get on a platform to speak at a conference, and I have experience being on a platform it's still scary for me because you're like, I'm delivering a message from the Lord. That's still nerve-wracking. But he's helped me, with some of my training. So anyway, that's my testimony. So that's how I got saved, and I've been in ministry ever since.
How long have you been in ministry?
So I've been doing ministry full time since then, 2003.
Wow.
So, and I did acting part-time until I moved to Texas in 2008. And I weren't there for another job. But then I worked with Christian artists. And so I was still like in that kind of
did you ever get tempted to kind of like offers came in that maybe were like a bit too secular or something for you that you had to really think about? Or does that still happen? Or like, what does that look like? Discerning through some of that, navigating through that?
Yeah, it does sometimes, especially if it's a voiceover for a product that you don't want to do, and there's an elegant way of backing out, even like I'll get messages from my agent and they'll be like, okay, this is a political ad. You don't have to do it if it violates your conscience. And so I'm not in Hollywood where it's like big time. I'm in Chicago. So it's a little different here. In the smaller projects. So, but when I was in theater, before I got saved, there were lots of times I violated my conscience But because it was, like I was in a musical, a tour called City of Angels, and that won the Tony on Broadway for Best Musical. It was a legit musical, but in the musical, I was naked in the show. And so in one scene, and you only saw my backside, but still, and I remember getting off stage after dress rehearsal, the undress rehearsal, and feeling so ashamed. And I was constantly cast in those kinds of roles. And I just felt like my value was just in what I looked like.
And that was after you were saved? Or
Now, it was before I was saved, but what I mean is still my conscience, even not.
you could still feel sort of the warfare in some of it.
Yeah. But after I got saved, I didn't, there wasn't anything. I was doing professional kind of stuff like corporate narration. And so it didn't really come up.
And then so dating, Christian dating.
Girl.
And it's so interesting. Well, you said you were 50, so your skin is incredible. Like,
Oh, thanks.
crazy. Yeah.
I'm starting to get some wrinkles now.
Yeah, right. 25. Sort of your last, like, what does dating look like for you? And, after you got saved.
Yeah, that was so confusing. So right after I got saved, like every boyfriend that was not saved wanted to get back together.
Yeah, and they're like, oh, I can tolerate your Christianity.
Totally. Yeah, I've had that a lot. Like, that's fine. I'll go to church with you. Even the guy that I was dating at the time, I broke up with him. And he was the sweetest man. He was so good to me, probably the most kind boyfriend I'd ever had. And it broke my heart because I knew we couldn't be together. And
he was equally yoked, or he was just...
He would go to church for me, but it wasn't his own choice.
Yeah.
And I knew that if we stayed together, that physical boundary was going to be really hard to keep. And I wanted to honor God. I didn't want to have sex with him, but I knew I was going to blow it if I did. And as a matter of fact, over that first 6 months or a year that I was saved and working at the church, I saw him once and we had sex. Like, so I failed.
Like, just didn't work. Yeah. Like,
okay. And I was like, and then I was so devastated and I beat myself up so much.
Yeah, you felt shame, but
totally.
We don't have to shame. Yeah.
But
and then have you dated since, or
Yeah.
The dating pool is tough when I think you're single and Christian. I think because everybody's married, which is awesome. And then your dating pool gets really small when you're like, oh, I'm super Christian. Are they on fire? No, so that gets tough.
Well, I found that
it's full of awesome married couples.
Yeah. It was hard to date, I think. Well, the church I was at, that little church, there was like one guy who was my age. They're mostly married couples, right?
And people are like, huh?
Yeah, exactly. And we knew each other from Moana as kids, so we'd known each other a long time. Yeah. But that first church, that senior pastor was married and he hit on me. And so I reported him to the elders and then I left that little church. And so that was really hard, and it kind of instilled in me a fear of even Christian men, because I expected it in the world, but not in the church. And then I went on staff at a mega church, and I had an experience with a pastor there that wasn't good. And so I dated and I had people interested and we would talk, but it was this really like I was open, but the guys were not open. And what I think now looking back is they knew my heart for God was really pure. And so there was probably still some lingering stuff in spiritual warfare around men that were attracted to me for what I looked like, but they knew that they couldn't get that from me. And so it was like, I'd have men interested, but they would never want to commit.
But no, it's like, oh, she's got armor. Dang it.
Yeah. To be honest, I haven't had a serious relationship since I've been saved. Like, I've dated and I've gone out on dates, but I just feel like I asked the Lord to protect me. Like,
and it's worth the wait, and if it comes, it comes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Yeah. Right. That is just, that's like such a nice, I think, well, you get what they call them, the Karens. They're like, oh, the condescending, why aren't you married? It's like, oh yeah, I'll just go rush out right now and grab the wrong one because you told me to. It's funny. But I think there's pressure on that, and you just wanna, like, and it's okay to be single. Like, that's okay. And sometimes God just has you single for ever or a long time or, and that's
Yeah.
okay. I think it's in Corinthians where it says like if you're burning, you're dating and you're burning like to get married. And then it says like, but if you don't have to, like stay single, like if you're not
Yeah.
feeling for that.
He says it's easier to, and I think that's when you're called to the cause of Christ, because ministry is warfare and it is hard. But so I ran a magazine for Christian singles. I have courses for singles where I help singles get healthy and whole for marriage. I'm 100% a believer if it's a desire of your heart that God gave it to you. And so that's been a place of wrestling for me. Like I always wanted to be a wife and a mom, like since I was a little girl. And so here now I'll never be able to birth children of my own. And people go, oh, you could adopt. And I'm in my 50s now, so I'm getting a little more tired. I don't think I want to start with babies, but
you'll adopt a 20-year-old.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think for singles, like there's however you feel, it's okay. If you don't want to get married, that's okay. If you want to be married, that's okay. It really and it's not even like if you put God first, then God will bring your husband. I don't feel like he does. I've seen lots of people who are like not content being single and they met their husband. So I've found there's not a formula. And really, when we try and make something happen, there is a little bit of like, what's the word? Like neediness that comes out. Like, so if you want
codependency or like,
yeah, you can get into lots of bad, or making it an idol. There's lots of pitfalls.
Yeah.
But there's no shame.
A little desperate.
Yeah. But if you want to be married and you're working towards it and trying to meet someone, awesome. Like, good for you. I don't judge people anymore. I used to judge myself for how I felt, but
I think it's really it's just interesting to hear your heart for God, and to have been like hurt many times over by the church, and that that we have to forgive the church, because the church is full of people, and we're all broken and healing and constant work in progress. And I find that it seems to be one of like the main things that keep people away from God is like, oh, why do people suffer? Good people suffer. And then why did the church hurt me?
Yeah.
So
I think that I've been really wronged by a lot of like people in leadership. And so I've gone to the Lord, like, I don't understand. Like, they have a big platform or they have a big church, and like, I don't understand. Like, and so I found the one question God won't answer is why. Like, but we can trust that he works everything together for good. And so I've just looked at it like that's part of my process, and God never initiated it, but he's going to use it. And so if I keep looking at God's face and in his eyes and ask him, like, what do you see in me in this? What do you want to say to me? What do you want to teach me? What do you want me to see? Like, if I just ask him a lot of questions and that keeps me focused on his thoughts, then the things that people have done, God's given me compassion for them, because they've got hurt people. We've heard that phrase, that there's something going on in their life that caused them to hurt me or to control or whatever. And when we can, from a place, I struggle to say this because I don't want people to think love means to let it continue to happen. It's our posture and our heart condition should see people as God's children too. We cannot like what they did. And believe me, I've been mad and I've had to forgive, but forgiveness is the only thing that I found is like a healing balm. Like when you truly forgive and you can look at them and say, it's okay. I can love who you are and not what you do. Then I'm set free,
Yeah. And you find, like you were saying earlier, you find like little roots where that still has like need to be dug up too, where you like in one area, you're like, okay, I can forgive it. Like, oh, I see that makes sense. And like, oh, feels like a bunch of bricks has just been unloaded from your back. And then another area, you like see where that stem, that roots, like, kind of grew over here too. And you're like, all right, dig that up. And it's not always graceful. It's painful, but it's so worth it. You know?
I had a situation where it was really painful and it kept coming up, like you'd forgive until you see that person doing well. And then you're like, what the heck, like, and so I went to the Lord and I actually said, are you mad at me for not having forgiven all the way like I thought I had? And I'm back in this place. And it was an interesting conversation. So when I talk about talking to God, I have a journal and I'm writing down my questions, and then I'm waiting to see what he says. And I'm writing down what I think, or what do I feel is the impression that I'm getting from him. And you can always go back and look at it later. But one of the revelations he gave me was a question. And so in the rabbinical way of teaching, the way Jesus taught, if you look, is often by asking questions. And so when I hear a question in my head, I'm like, oh, it's probably God wants me to see something. And he said to me, Jill, do you think that I wouldn't get upset about injustice to my kids? And I was like, oh. So if I'm upset about it, like, he's not mad at me for being upset, because it's not like godly to not be angry. It's just be angry and do not sin, and be angry and don't let it form into bitterness. And so what does that look like? In taking it to the Lord, just me being with him and talking to him about it, he was able to share some things that, and bring revelation and bring scriptures that made me be able to forgive at another level. Because it's like layers of an onion of just, got to do it over, especially for the really bad stuff, the personal, like physical offenses, right? Because that can be painful.
And then what is sort of like your tools for success? Like, being in the Word, listening to like podcasts and other like sermons and things like that, right? And like journaling, and what other things could, like, tips for healing or your tools?
Well, interesting. So a lot of my clients, my coaching clients, were asking me for some of the tools I used with them, like when I'd help them hear God and encounter his presence, and I put it into my book. So the book is called Freedom Coach Model, and I don't mean to like pitch it, but it's not a book. It's not like you read it. It's more like 20 different chapters on 20 different subjects, where I teach you, like, I'll do a little teaching, like half a page. And then I ask God these questions, pray this prayer. And so if it's forgiveness, it's, God, who do I need to forgive today? And what do I need to forgive them for? How did that make me feel? And then at the end, it's just saying a prayer. And part of that is, I release all the consequences of my life, all the things I'm still suffering with because of their thing. I release that into your hands. They don't owe me anything. And so sometimes we do it from our head and out of our will, but then our heart and our emotions can catch up with that. And God supernaturally does something when we're obedient to freedom. And so the tools that I mostly use are in that book. But I'd say number one, yes, I love, without the Word of God, I am a cranky pot if I am not in the Word of God. And like, I'll be honest with you, when you're traveling and stuff, you're like, I got like 10 minutes, I am a jerk. Like, I totally need God's Word.
You just feel like your brain changing, like your nature changes. Yeah.
Because then my thoughts are
feeling fleshy.
Yeah. I think there's a verse I was reading recently about when you have your own opinion, you think you're right, and like you got to follow the ways of the Lord. I can't remember what it is. But anyway, so my main thing, if I were to tell people, yes, be in the Word. Worship is a warfare thing. The enemy hates the sound of praise and worship, and you change the atmosphere around you. So if you're feeling bad on the inside, change what's going around you in the spirit with worship and praise and gratitude. That's another huge key. But the main one is just spending time with the Lord in conversation, asking questions, writing down what you think he's saying. And I have a mentorship I do about the different ways God speaks and we hear him. And so everyone, that means something different to everyone. Like, I've shared examples of how I heard a voice in my head. Sometimes it's an impression, and sometimes you get a dream, but just asking and meeting with God through his Word, through worship, but making time we listen. I think that's huge. A lot of us, we do a lot of the talking and we don't do a lot of the listening. And that's where I've gotten most of my healing. Like, God has taught me, like, sometimes he's taught me something and I'm like, whoa, that was so smart. That was not me. Like, I know that was him, and I wouldn't have gotten it if I was doing all the talking.
Yeah. Tuning. Yeah. Is there anything that's on your heart, which is like what's going on in the world, like all of this hot mess? Is there anything you feel like in particular he's put on your heart?
Yeah, there's so many different things. Even I've been trying to like ask him, like, not only how to pray for what he's doing in my world, but how do you want me to pray for the US? How do you want me to pray for the world? Like, what are you doing right now that you need us as your spiritual warriors to back what you're doing? Like, I want God's strategy and God's plan, and I want to back it, because we can come up with lots of worldly strategies of the right thing to do, but most of the time we're working on the symptoms and not the root. So I have felt since this started in the early 2020, I asked the Lord what he wanted me to pray for this year, even for my ministry. And I got like nothing. And he just said, this is the year of my faith. You'll see my faithfulness. And I was like, okay, I don't know what that, but I have lots of courses and things I can do, but I felt like he's like, don't spend time with me in prayer and listening and praying what's on my heart. And so that's what I feel like God is doing right now in this is he wants us all to draw near to him. The noise has been quieted a little bit because we've had more time at home or with our families. And when your to-do list gets simplified and you're not in the hustle, you can be more still and quiet before God. I think he's calling us to stillness. And here's the reason why. The key is there will be another time of busy activity, but if we don't get the tools and the training and the stillness, we won't be able to survive the war. So that's what I think he's doing right now.
Yeah, just spend that time, take that time. Even if it feels like you're just pulled away, like you're saying 15, 20 minutes or, I
think he's calling us all to more than 15, 20.
Yeah.
He's calling us to a day retreat, a half
let it
day.
be. Yeah, because 15 is not going to do it.
Yeah, like more time with him.
Yeah.
So, and distractions come up. Like I've set aside half a days or days to spend with the Lord, and something comes up that I'm like, oh, I've got to do that, and you can't get out of it. And so there's a strategy against us getting into rest. So I feel like that's the key for what we need to be pressing into.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Jill, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for asking me about my story, friend. I love seeing you. I mean, people don't know, but we've chatted, but we've never looked at each other in the face and talked.
I know, face to face. Kind of like real life.
Yeah. So good.
Okay.
Well, thanks for having
coming
me.
to meet you in real life for real sometime. And pre-quarantine hug.
That's right. Air hug.
Aww. Yeah, bless your heart. And I just love how he's used you and how you let him and how you've like been through the storm and you share it and you stayed firm in your faith.
Thanks, friend.
Warrior. Yeah.
It's all him.
Praise God.
I've not done it I don't show the times on social media when I've done it bad. I mean, let's be honest. So here, I'm gonna, cool.
Yeah, so if you could share some of your links, like where we can find you, your podcast, the blog, everything.
Yeah, really the easiest way is to go to jillmonaco.com. And at the top, you can find my Facebook, which is Jill Monaco Ministries, and Twitter and Instagram is just at Jill Monaco. And from the website, you can find people can find tons of free resources. I have free audio classes and freedom challenges and all kinds of things that they can get for free. And there's a couple paid things on there too, but yeah. So
is it like for men too, right? There's like men and women.
Yeah. When I started my ministry, I didn't feel like I was supposed to just define it for women. And so it's just, I have lots of men who like the resources too. And the podcast is just called The Jill Monaco Show because I couldn't think of a name.
That's a great name. Yeah.
It's a creative. So it's on all the places, iTunes or what have you. But the goal of my podcast is really to bring on guests who teach us how to love well. And so I have authors and some of my teaching, but just the goal of love God, love yourself, love others.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, sister.
Thanks so much. I'll see you later.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.